Welcome to session 3 of the PayPal story. So to recap session 2, the key things that we covered in session 2 was how we could, in a startup with a good idea, how would you motivate a team to achieve a very good time to market with the first version of the product. And the second thing that we covered was why US tends to have a lot of innovation and what other countries could possibly learn from the US. Now, in terms of this session, we'll start with trying to see what we can do to fix rapid growth problems. So this is a nice problem to have. Most startups struggle to get growth. In PayPal or X.com, as it was at that time, we didn't have that problem. We had extremely rapid growth. But how do we cope with that rapid growth? Now, just to give you an example, now we had a Christmas party. And at that point in time, recruiting people or talent in the Valley was extremely difficult. So my wife, Anita, joined me at the Christmas party, and Elon started chatting with her. And then he asked her what she was doing. And she said that how was she liking Silicon Valley and how was she adjusting? And she said she'd like it better if she had a job. So she was looking around to join a job, and she had her eyes set on Oracle because Oracle had a nice gym, and she would probably end up joining Oracle. So Elon asked her, "What do you do?" So she said, "Well, I, can do a little bit of data warehousing, or SQL. I know some reporting." So Elon said, "Oh, well, we need someone like that. So why don't you come and see me? And I would like you to join X.com." So Anita went to see him, and she really didn't want to join because she felt that, having all our eggs in one basket may not be such a good idea. So she said, "Okay, I'll come and help you for free for a little while, and then we'll see." What attracted her to X.com was the amazing sort of change the world type of feeling that people had, and the quality of the people in the team. And it was like a real fun place, which was very, very important to Anita because she likes the social environment in which she's working is more important to her than the job itself. So one of the things that came with the rapid growth was that now X.com was a company that was being noticed. It was being written about, and people wanted to join X.com. So we were recruiting them, but we had no space. So we had just about 3,000 square feet on University Avenue. And we were recruiting people. So at one point in time, before we managed to move into bigger space, we had around 70 people in this 3,000 square feet. So you can imagine it was like the black hole of, you heard of the black hole of Calcutta, but this was like the black hole of University Avenue, where you had not more than like 40 square feet per person. And if you sort of got up and went to the restroom, when you came back, you might find that your seat had gone. So people were encouraged to go to coffee shops. We had all our recruiting meetings or any meetings in coffee shops and things like that, because our office was absolutely crammed. Then we had some problems with, so the front end of our technology was designed by us, but the back end, we decided to use a system which was provided by a company called eProfile. And this eProfile was not designed for this kind of load, which PayPal was putting on it. So that caused many bugs in the eProfile system. And we had to do a lot of reconcilement, and it was becoming a real pain. We also had to, so one of the central problems in the X.com model was that we had people opening X.com accounts because we had very rightly figured out that if everyone in the world had an X.com account, then money transfer would be trivial because it would just be moving money from one account to another account. So the question was, how do we get people to open X.com accounts? And then how do we get them to add money? Now, one of the ways they could add money was through a credit card. And that had its own set of problems, some regulatory and so on and so forth. But those we could deal with. But the other problem was that we would be a merchant and we would have to pay 1.9% or so, even after we had negotiated a really good deal, of the money that was added to the account. And we weren't charging people for funds transfers. So with every transaction, we were losing money. So one of the things we thought about was, can people add accounts by depositing checks? So we tried to get them to mail in checks because we didn't have branches and things like that. And then we deposited those checks. And we found that a very large number of checks would bounce and there would be all kinds of problems in processing the checks. And it was quite a mess. So we actually stopped accepting deposits by checks. And we said that you can't deposit cash, you can't deposit checks. So now it's going to be only electronic. So the other thing was in terms of trying to link your bank account with PayPal. Now that was much cheaper than credit cards, but how do we get people to link the bank account? And when you link the bank account, you had to mail in or fax in a voided check. So we knew that American consumers are not going to go through all the hassle of mailing in voided checks. So we introduced a fax option, but then with the fax option, the faxes that we would get would be quite unclear at times. And it was, again, quite very, very heavy on the back-end process, because imagine getting like 1,000 faxes with voided checks and trying to reconcile them, which account this thing came, and then checking to see whether the check, and then setting up the ACH to debit the bank account. So it was quite a mess. So aside from this, we had problems with customer service. So there was a deluge of emails, and everyone was answering emails all the time, and including my son, who was like in the 9th grade. We co-opted him also to answer emails. And then we actually got one of the people's families who was out in Nebraska. They had about 20, 30 people who were answering emails. And that really ultimately led to a call center and an email processing center for customer service being set up in Nebraska. And then so Elon was always about trying to be innovative and keep on adding new stuff. And he felt that, people in general were good. And so he said, well, why don't we give a $20 credit line to people? And we had a bank at that time, so we could. And he said, what kind of defaults will we have with $20? So he started this thing of, without a credit check, giving $20 as credit to people. And we found an immense number of credit problems and things like that. So we had a lot of people taking up the credit, but very few people paying back. And luckily we found out in time, but we still had to deal with all these and close down that particular product. So there was this $20 fiasco. And then Elon came up with this idea, which was actually suggested to him by someone from technology who didn't really understand banking, that, why don't we just trust people and let them enter their routing numbers and their bank account numbers rather than sending in a voided check. So at that point, I said, this is crazy, because people will put other people's bank account numbers and things like that. And what check do we have? But I was kind of overruled. And at that point, I almost decided to resign from X.com. And fortunately I did, because, I was kind of used to the thing of a more hierarchical kind of structure. But here, like though I was head of product, and I said, look, we can't do this. I was overruled just because some technology, and I had quite a big argument with this technology person. But ultimately, Elon, who was the CEO, backed the technology person, and I had to back down. But sure enough, within like a week, 10 days, we started getting all kinds of bad press because people did abuse the system, and some widows' accounts got debited. And soon we had to stop that system. So I was proved right, but again, at a massive cost. So as you can see, with all these things going on, getting the back office right, even though we were getting a lot of people, how do you get all these people to work on the right things? At that point, one of the people who was my friend from Citibank, a person called Sandeep Lal, had also joined X.com, and he fortunately had a lot of operational experience and was able to put things together and keep some sort of control. But this is a very key learning for startups, that even if you get your front end right, you get a lot of customers. If your back end is not right and you don't fix it, then you will not scale. And this is why, like, out of the 70 companies that we tracked, who tried to do what PayPal did, they either didn't get their front end right or they didn't get their back end right, whatever. But fortunately, PayPal, as the story progresses, got both right and ended up getting a huge amount of market share. Now, I get a lot of credit personally for making a key innovation that really saved X.com and rescued the business model. And that was something called random deposit, because it allowed people to link their bank accounts to the PayPal account electronically. And we found a way to add money to the X.com account, which was not all that expensive, and something that was very, very fundamental to the X.com business model being viable. So a lot of people ask me, how did I come up with this idea? And the thing was that I was reading this book about controlling fraud, and it had talked about, it was called Secrets and Lies, and how you can try and differentiate between signal and noise. So then it occurred to me that, look, if I was able to send 2 random deposits to a person's bank account, which they linked themselves, then if this was something that belonged to them, they would be able to access that account and tell us what is the random deposits that we sent. And thereby we could complete the whole verification process. So I was saying that amongst all these deposits that we're getting, all these things, all these bank accounts, how do I identify whether this particular bank account that this person is linking is actually their bank account? And then I hit upon this idea. So the idea occurred to me while I was sleeping. And this often happens. I think it's your subconscious that works. And when I got up, I said, I kind of wrote this idea down so that I didn't forget it. And then I went to work. And then, I went out for a coffee with a friend. So we walked to a coffee shop. And as we were walking back after we got coffee, I told my friend Todd, who was my colleague, saying that, I had this idea. And I still remember Todd stopped in the middle of the street and sort of bowed down to me and said, "What a great idea." And he said, "Wow, And then we got back to the office, and then Todd said, this man's a genius. He's got this great idea, and everyone sort of gathered around, and immediately there was like things were drawn up as to how we can execute it, and things like that. And so our time to execution from the time that I had the idea was, I think, maybe 3 or 4, maybe 5 days, maybe a week, and we were live with the idea. And then in the meanwhile, I was thinking, because I knew how this idea could be broken. And one of the things was that if I was a fraudster, I could compromise a customer service person at a bank and find out what the random deposits were. So we had set up traps for this, and we already knew how people might try to compromise the system. And so when we did get some returns, we were watching, and we went to the banks, and they had a system of logging customer service and so on and so forth. And we were able to identify the rogue customer service person in that bank and get that person arrested. Once we got that done, then this spread through the grapevine, and our random deposit system became almost 100% foolproof and very easy. So this, again, I think is something that people who want to understand disruptive innovation could learn from the story, as to how you can get an idea, how people in your colleagues can support the idea instead of being very critical and this thing. And then how can you execute the idea? And then how can you be your own devil's advocate for the idea and try and make the idea foolproof? So that's all for this session. The story continues in the next session. Thank you very much for listening to me.